Foundation, and he had business concerns in Libya. It's been reported.
Is there an ethical concern with a known political operative working for a supposed nonprofit that is pushing for a war that he can profit from?
Well, maybe. I think the public interest here is that Mrs. Clinton promised she'd stay out of Clinton Foundation business, and she immediately and secretly started taking advice from a Clinton Foundation official, Sidney Blumenthal.
Now, as we turn this body over to the opposition party here and they launch fake investigations into foreign influence, I would like to take some time to ask the panel about real foreign influence, because I know they're not going to. Now, we continually see foreign governments and foreign entities funnel millions of dollars to environmental groups. Two of the largest environmental groups in the world, the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Sierra Club, have received millions in grants from the Sea Change Foundation. The Sea Change Foundation itself got millions from a Bermuda company linked to Russia. As we all know, the environmental groups have undermined the energy sector in the United States. They've even got fracking banned in the cash-strapped state of New York. Now, if my friends across the aisle, the media and Mr. Mueller, were truly interested in Russian interference, would it make sense to start there, Mr. Fitton?
Oh, I've seen reports about that. The Russians obviously have an interest in making sure that competitors are harmed in the energy sector, and I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more attention, their involvement in the environmental movement here in the United States.
So Russian money affecting U.S. policies that Russia benefits, it's incredible. In my other committee, the Natural Resources Committee, we're trying to investigate the relationship between the Natural Resources Defense Council and their links to Communist China government. The NRDC has gotten cozy with the environmentally unfriendly Chinese government while suing the U.S. government whenever it can, particularly the U.S. Navy and its weapon development programs. Now, I'm sure I don't need to remind anyone here that China sees the U.S. Navy as its greatest foe. Mr. Fitton, should a nonprofit be made to register as a foreign agent if it is taking funds and orders from a foreign government that is trying to harm U.S. national and energy security?
Maybe. One of the things I noted about the Clinton Foundation activities is that Doug Bann and others were always advocating on behalf of foreign nationals, which raised an issue of the Foreign Agents Registration Act as well. But certainly if my understanding of the law is that there would be registration requirements potentially if you're essentially taking orders from a foreign government and beholden to them financially.
Now, nonprofits like the Open Society Foundations have been giving billions from wealthy benefactors. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, while there's nothing wrong with someone giving their money to an organization like Open Society, there is a problem when the federal government doles out millions of dollars in grants to these organizations. For instance, the National Immigration Law Center received hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants from the federal government and over $1 million from the Open Society Foundation while working against U.S. interest. Does it make sense to dole out taxpayer funds to groups that not only look to erode U.S. sovereignty, but are against official U.S. positions, Mr. Fitton?
Well, I think it's controversial. I think what also would be controversial is that the Soros operation and Mr. Soros' foundations, I think, is going to spend about $1 billion this year. As you point out, mostly of his own money is subsidized in part by U.S. tax dollars. And he's a controversial figure in terms of his policy outlooks. And I question why it is tax dollars are supporting him.
It's definitely. One last comment, Mr. Chairman. You know, when we start looking at nonprofits, I actually was part of a nonprofit, and you're rated about how much of your dollar goes to the mission statement of what you detail. So, for example, a good nonprofit, 97 cents of every dollar goes to that mission statement. And listening to Mr. Hackney, I now notice that the Clinton Foundation was very top-heavy with a lot of employees, a lot of exorbitant travel, and not really a dollar-wise penny spent. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes Ms. Watson-Coleman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Mr. Fitton, let me ask you something very quickly. Before your position with Judicial Watch, what were your various jobs?
I work for other conservative nonprofits, Accuracy Media.
Have you ever worked for government?
Government? No. Well, back when I was a kid, I worked for the town, but
Have you ever worked for a Republican elected official?
No.
Thank you.
I always worked in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. Today, we're holding this hearing again. This is another hearing in a multi-year investigation of the Clinton Foundation, completely on unsubstantial allegations. But at the same time, we refuse to do anything, not I, to investigate various serious allegations related to the Trump administration, foundation, both. Last month, a state judge in New York ruled that prosecutors could proceed with legal action against the Trump Foundation for allegations focusing on, and I quote, the misuse of charitable assets and self-dealing, close quote. Let me read from that judge's ruling, quote, the petitioner also alleges that charitable assets, primarily consisting of money donated by outside sources, were used to promote Mr. Trump's properties, purchase personal items, advance Mr. Trump's presidential election campaign, and settle certain personal legal obligations. Professor, is the judge's ruling an indication that the allegations against the Trump Foundation are creditable?
I don't want to speak directly to Trump Foundation.
Speak to whether or not your perspective on the judges.
Yeah, I mean, when a judge finds something, that is a finding in the public record. It becomes a part of the public record.
And what was your sort of reaction to this notion of self-dealing?
I, again, don't want to speak specifically to the Trump Foundation. It's a major issue within private foundations when wealthy individuals put significant money and use it for their own purposes, but that's not as to the Trump.
Would you agree that this Trump Foundation is worthy of congressional oversight?
I believe the entire nonprofit sector is worthy of oversight. I think
that would
it's really
include
important.
This foundation?
Absolutely.
Professor, on June 15th, you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about the Trump Foundation. In that piece, you wrote, and I quote, as a former attorney for the chief counsel of the IRS, who specialized in nonprofit organizations, I believe Mr. Trump is also criminally liable for his actions. If I were still at the IRS based on the lawsuit, I would make a criminal referral on charges of tax evasion or false statements on a tax return, or both. Why specifically do you believe Mr. Trump is criminally liable for his actions regarding the Trump Foundation, and how serious do you consider the crimes of tax evasion or making false statements on tax returns?
So again, I'm not going to speak to the Trump Foundation here. My writing speaks for itself, and
Let me ask you a question about that.
Sure.
You wrote an op-ed article. You're here testifying, and there have been specific questions to you. Why are you suddenly unwilling to answer specifically regarding the purpose for which we are here today?
And
We're not here.
And the chair would weigh in on this. Let me just say that the gentlewoman makes a point. If you've written an op-ed, you can't all of a sudden, as much as I might like you to not comment on it, you can't not do that. I mean, she's asking a legitimate question. You need to answer it, Mr. Hackney.
Let me go there. So, charity matters deeply, and it matters deeply that the people who file returns take care to do the things that they intend to do.
So, Professor,
and when they take that money, and if they use it in ways over a series of years that's problematic, and they sign that return in those instances where it is over a period of time, I think that's significant and does warrant a discussion of criminal.
So do you believe what you wrote?
I do.
Do you stand by what you wrote?
I stand by what I wrote.
Okay. In your op-ed, you also are quoted as saying, the IRS saves criminal consequences for notorious and continuous violations of the law. And the misuse of a charity for personal and political purposes over the years, as alleged by the New York State Attorney General, is in fact the type of case that the IRS goes after with criminal sanctions. What notorious and continuous violations of the law were you referring to that you believe that were committed by the Trump Foundation?
And so, Mr. Hackney, her time has expired, but you can answer the question.
Just very quickly, there's been a series of representatives, and I did not study up for that specifically right now, but there's been a series of representatives have used their charities. There was even one recently, I think, out of my state of Pennsylvania. I'm not positive about that, but there have been a series of ones that the IRS has brought in those contexts.
Thank you. You know, Professor, you have frustrated me.
I apologize.
Because you are a person who has written what you believe. You are a professor. You are a scholar. You are a former IRS employee. And then you can't even feel comfortable in supporting what you've already said in writing. With that, I yield back.
I do support it.
The chair recognizes himself for a series of questions. Mr. Hackney, let me follow up on Ms. Watson-Coleman. How many pages of the documents the Trump Foundation and their filings have you reviewed?
I've reviewed all of their 990 PFs over a long period of time.
Yeah, but 990 it doesn't tell the whole story.
The tax returns that the IRS has filed. I've also reviewed the public record in terms of the reports made by David Fahrenthold.
In terms of what is their internal documents, would you be qualified to provide an audit in terms of what they've done or not done, based on the documents you've reviewed?
I'm not certain of the question.
Based on the documents you've reviewed,
yep,
would you be qualified to be able to give an opinion on an audit of the Trump Foundation?
So I think you're asking, have I seen every single possible document out there? And I have not seen every possible document out there. I'm doing based on what the public record is, and that was it that I had done in that.
So based on public record, you're saying that there's enough in the public record to say that there should be a criminal referral, Mr. Hackney? You know, you're a law professor. I mean, I would find that just unimaginable.
I think that's different than saying that he's definitely in there. I discussed to the fact that.
But my question remains: are you saying there's enough in the public domain to refer it as a criminal matter?
I believe there were. In the instance where
you're under oath, so
I understand,
and you're a law professor, so I want to see your students be able to answer this accurately.
Absolutely. I believe where we know that there is a high likelihood that there have been false statements in return, and there have been choices.
And how do you know that?
It appears that there were false statements.
Appears and know are two different words.
I understand what you're saying.
So you don't know.
I believe, based on the public record, and that was what I was writing it based upon.
So based on a public record, you think there's enough for a criminal referral?
I believe that in that report that there was enough to show possible problems there. But again, I don't want to go into that, and I did not prepare to talk to specific facts. This hearing was called at the last minute, and I have not had that time.
Well, you as a witness were called at the last minute by the minority, so I just want to make sure that that's clear.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
So let me go a little bit further, Mr. Fitton. I want to talk about, everybody's talking about how great the Clinton Foundation is and how above board and A ratings and platinum ratings and gold ratings and all of this. There is a report from November 10th of 2008, which is an internal audit. It actually comes from an internal audit that has a conclusion. It says, the challenges and deficiencies plaguing the foundation cannot be overstated. There are real and undermine the organization's effectiveness immediately and more long term. To address these issues that present immediate threats, the foundation should revamp its legal and HR operations, should review its governance structure and documents, and should have an open and honest discussion with the president about the future of the foundation. Would you not find that alarming if that was the conclusion of an internal audit, Mr. Fitton?
I wouldn't want to get an audit like that.
So,
the problem is there's another audit in 2000.
Yeah, you got a microphone.
Oh, there was another audit in 2011 that raised some of the same issues.
Well, that's
not as directly, but suggesting that.
Well, that's where I was going, and I appreciate you mentioning that because that was in 2010, and then another audit in 2011, as you talk about, by a very different firm, talked about the potential conflicts of interest and the fact that those conflicts of interest policies that were suggested to be put in place. However, this is a quote, however, we did not find any evidence of the enforcement of the conflict of conflict of interest. Are you saying that in your discovery process with FOIA that there is a potential conflict of interest between the charitable mission of the Clinton Foundation and what might have been going on? Have you found that?
Yes. Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Clinton and the foundation recognized those potential conflicts of interest and tried to reassure the President Obama and the Senate that they would be taken care of and disclosed. And as I said, they were either rubber stamped or key aspects of it weren't disclosed. And or in the case of Mrs. Clinton, she directly started violating her own agreement by dealing with this Sidney Blumenthal and allowing her staff to, on a regular basis, take care of Clinton Foundation interests using public resources.
Mr. Fitton, is it likely, based on reports that you've seen, is it likely that the special counsel is also looking into things other than Russian collusion narratives for President Trump, based on reports that you've read? Are they looking into other matters as it relates to President Trump?
Oh, yes. I would assume the Southern District investigation, the campaign finance allegations that have been raised up there were as a result initially of interest from the special
Is it likely that they're looking into the Trump Foundation as well?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. Based on your testimony, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, if the special counsel is looking at that, why would Attorney General Eric Holder not have looked into some of the issues as it related to the Uranium One deal? And why would they have looked the other way? Because apparently, according to your testimony, they did not know whether the FBI or DOJ ever alerted the committee members to criminal activity that they uncovered. And that was a quote from your written testimony. The investigation was ultimately supervised by U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein and Andy McCabe. Isn't it amazing how these names continue to show up? Isn't it amazing? And with that, if there's no further business before this panel, we will excuse you two gentlemen. We thank you for your testimony, and we'll ask the next panel to be set up. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.